Hello everyone, this is Terry Polish, the Global Engineering Advisor at Carbo Ceramics, and I'm back again for another installment of Results from the Field. Today we'll be looking at a SCALEGUARD installation. SCALEGUARD is our prop and delivered scale inhibitor technology, and we'll be looking at a case history of where that product was used in an Alaska North Slope field to prevent scale buildup in a water flood. So before we get started, I do want to talk a little bit about the technology so we're all on the same page when we get to the case history. So SCALEGUARD is a prop and delivered scale inhibition system. It starts with ceramic grains, which are engineered to have uniformly connected porosity such that we can then take that grain and we can infuse it with a chemical. In this particular case of SCALEGUARD, we're going to infuse it with scale inhibitor. Now, one of the key aspects of this technology is the control release membrane. We place this membrane on the outside of the pellet, and that allows it to give the scale inhibition program a much longer life. Otherwise, the elution is wasted early and it sacrifices late-term inhibition. So the control release technology is a key aspect of this. And then, of course, the last part of the process is the fact that it is a proppant grain, and so it is injected or it is placed in the proppant pack and is essentially the first point of scale inhibition. So you now are inhibiting everything from the fracture all the way up to the surface facilities. So some of the highlights of how the design works. We typically replace a portion of the proppant pack again. In some cases, unconventionals, it's going to be less than 1% of the proppant pack, much less than 1%. In some other installations where the proppant pack is lower or you need more scale inhibition, higher water rates, it might be as much as 40% or higher. Each design is an engineered design. We determine the MIC, the minimum inhibition concentration, the elution profile. We then determine how much water is going to be inhibited. Of course, as a part of this, since it is a proppant, it is designed such that we are going to maintain the proppant pack performance, such as the conductivity. After being installed, the idea is it saves you on your lease operating costs and as well as assures long-term production. And again, as I mentioned before, the great thing about this is you're not just inhibiting from a mandrel above or somewhere else. You are inhibiting all the way from the point of where the waters are entering into the fracture itself. We've treated hundreds of wells to date with this technology. There are some wells that have well over 5 years of production that are still being inhibited. We're still seeing inhibitor coming back. And to date, we have not seen a scale failure in any of our installations. So next, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this case history. Again, this is on the North Slope of Alaska. The North Slope of Alaska is known for needing water flood in its oil reservoirs, and in most cases, the water injection for the water flood is used as seawater that's taken from the Beaufort Sea. And so as such, there is water mixing in the reservoir, and so the North Slope of Alaska is a very high scaling tendency. So in this particular application, it's a horizontal well development. It is a water flood, again, as I mentioned before. This is a line drive pattern, so you take horizontal wells and alternate injector, producer, and that gives you your water injection pattern. Now, the problem you have with a water flood is that the wells don't produce water until you have water flood breakthrough. So you need a scale inhibition program that can inhibit scale from the beginning. So normally, if a water flood breakthrough occurs, and now you know you have water flood breakthrough, so now you can start your scale inhibition program. But unfortunately, if one does that on the North Slope of Alaska, you might have days and many weeks of production before you even know that you have water flow. So the idea for this particular operator was get the scale inhibitor in the well and it's ready to go from the moment that the water flood breaks through, because that's your highest scaling tendency, the flood front itself. The other problem here is that these are horizontal wells. So most wells on the North Slope of Alaska are not horizontal, but in this case they are. And getting in and doing a scale inhibition squeeze or anything like that is going to be difficult, if not impossible, and it's certainly going to be very expensive. So again, getting something that would have some longevity to it would be beneficial. So there's more information on this, by the way, documented in an SPE paper 195326, but I will go through a couple of highlights here now. So as I mentioned before, we do engineer the design at each one of the installations. So in this particular case, there were really two things that were of primary concern. And the first was, what would happen with the scale inhibitor proppant, the SCALEGUARD, after being in the well for 1 to 2 years, however long it is, 3 years, until water flood breakthrough. So what this is an elution profile. So you have the scale inhibitor proppant, the SCALEGUARD, and you're circulating fluid past the pack, and you're measuring the scale inhibitor returns. So the black line represents the control. So in the black line, there was no oil that injected ahead of time. It was just the beginning of placing water into the system. And you can see this is the elution curve versus pore volumes of water injected. Now, for the case history, we took the same SCALEGUARD proppant, but this time we circulated multiple pore volumes of kerosene or hydrocarbon past that SCALEGUARD. And of course, there was no scale inhibitor released. The scale inhibitor needs water in order for it to come into solution. But as you can see, we then started water, and if we overlay the green curve, which is the curve which had kerosene in the beginning, and the black curve, which is a control, you can see they overlay quite nicely. If anything, the SCALEGUARD that had kerosene first is slightly better. So this confirmed that this product should be able to sit dormant and waiting on the scale inhibitor the water to break through the formation. The other part of this is the connectivity. So the other thing we do, these are very high rate wells, making several thousand barrels of oil a day. And so connectivity is critical. So what we're looking at here is a connectivity curve versus stress. The black line that runs through here is the connectivity of 1620 carbolite. So they're using a premium low density ceramic proppant for their completions. And then overlaid on top of that is this connectivity curve of 1620 carbolite with 5% SCALEGUARD substitute, and then another one with a 10% substitute. So as you can see, that overlaid quite nicely all the way to 12,000 psi. It's suspected we could have gone a little bit higher, but at least we did confirm the upward coverage of 10%. The actual application up here in the North Slope was going to be somewhere in this 4,000 to 6,000 psi range. So conductivity would be kept, as well as a water breakthrough would be inhibited when it occurred. So from a design standpoint, there were 4 wells that were going to be treated. These were actually treated, one in late 2015, but the rest in 2016. Horizontal lateral lengths of about 5,500 to 7,000 feet. Each well had about 11 to 12 stages. And each well received about 2.6 million pounds of 1620 carbolite. That 1620 carbolite contained 5% SCALEGUARD, 1620 SCALEGUARD. The operator elected to go to 5% instead of 10% because they felt like that would give them enough inhibition to cover about 2 to 4 years of inhibition time, or about 2 million barrels of water. As it goes out into the future, the scaling tendency decreases dramatically. So the wells were all fracked. Shortly after the frack, they had frack load water flow back, and we had them grab samples during the load recovery. And you can see we were getting scale inhibitor back, as we would suspect, as that load water was coming past the SCALEGUARD and the fracture. So we confirmed the presence of SCALEGUARD. Then the wells didn't make any water for multiple years, and after about 2.5 years, a little under 3. 2 of the wells broke through, and as you can see, they immediately grabbed samples, and you can see in well A and well C, both of them saw inhibitor concentrations, and of course they were well above the MIC. So since that time, a 3rd well had also broken through, and now what we're doing is we're looking at the same scale inhibitor residuals, but now what we're going to do is plot it up versus cumulative water produced, because this becomes more predictive. This allows you then to figure out how much water will be produced, inhibited in the future, and then you can figure out the length of time it'll last. And so what we've done is we've overlaid all 3 of the wells, normalized to 0 water produced. And as you can see, together they make a nice elution curve, very similar to what we saw in the laboratory. So the max is here 40 to 50, so you can see it falls down, and now we are running pretty level in here. And this is a typical elution curve as we see in a lot of our installations. And again, we're well above the MIC of 3. So with that, I'll just go ahead and summarize. Again, SCALEGUARD is a proppant-delivered scale inhibitor technology. It uses a porous substrate, an infused chemical in that substrate, and a semi-permeable membrane on the outside that allows you to assure your production and prevent it from everything from being scale-free all the way from the fracture to the gathering system. In this particular application review today, this is in the Alaska North Slope, which has a very high scaling tendency due to the seawater makeup for the water flood. The proppant needed to be in place for over 2 years till water flood breakthrough occurred and be ready to inhibit, which it did. We've had 3 wells now break through, waiting on the 4th. All of them are successfully inhibiting at the moment of water breakthrough. All are projecting to inhibit about 2 million barrels of water, and at this point in time they've saved a large amount of remedial costs and certainly have prevented production loss. Again, this has been pumped in multiple wells across North America and is now of course expanding into the global reach as well. So with that, I'm going to close. I would like to draw your attention to our website, www.carboceramics.com, if you want more information on this technology or any of our other proppant-related technologies, or if you'd like to know more about our strategy and consulting or Frac Pro software. And of course, if you would like to reach out to me, I'm always available as well. My email address is located there on the page. And with that, I'm going to close, and I want to wish everybody a great day.